Hey, everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm thrilled to have Dorothy Dowling join us. Dorothy is a legendary commercial leader in the world of hospitality, spent 17 years as the Chief Marketing Officer at BWH Hotel Group, SVP of Sales. She's held many commercial leadership roles. And I think for those of you who have not met her, you're going to be thrilled to meet her in this conversation, learn a little bit about her career journey. Dorothy, thank you so much for taking some time to join us today. Maybe for those who have not met you yet, can you walk us through high level what your career journey has been to date? And then I think there's so many threads that we'll be able to uncover in our conversation from there.
Well, first of all, Josiah, thank you. It's a real honor to be with you today. And yes, I'm happy to give you a sense of my background. I'm a Canadian by birth. I've lived now in the US for just over 25 years. I did both my undergraduate and graduate degree in Canada at the University of Waterloo. So the new Blackberry movie, I was there when Mike Lazarus was, so it brought back a lot of memories when I watched that movie. He was part of the incubation group at the University of Waterloo. But I spent about half of my professional career in Canada. I started out as a research analyst, moved into consulting, and then began my journey working with brands. And that is how I ended up moving to the US. I was with HFS many years ago, which of course is now Wyndham, and had many opportunities to work. I was with Aramark in the sports and entertainment group, and then, of course, had a very long tenure at Best Western, working with David Kong, which was one of the most joyous experiences of my career, mostly because of the ownership and having the honor of just working with a strategic leader like David. So that sort of would give you my career evolution from going from research into consulting, and then obviously on the branding and building really revenue contribution to organizations throughout my career.
I love it. Well, there's so many elements of what we can talk about, but I'm always curious to hear what people are thinking about now. Before we started recording, you and I were talking a little bit about some of the speaking that you're doing and some of the keynotes uh, speeches you're giving specifically around leadership lessons that you've learned. Walk us through a little bit of kind of how you're thinking about this today, and then we could, I'd love to dive into some of those lessons or those leadership insights that you've gathered over your career so far.
Sure. I'd love to speak about this, Josiah. So when I left Best Western, I took a little bit of time to sort of really think about what was next for me. And I will tell you, I've been a big fan of Chip Conley my entire career. And his book, Wisdom at Work, really set me on a different path because it really is that journey of how you give it back or pay it forward. And it's really being that modern elder and the wisdom that you've acquired over your career journey and how to share it with others and help others advance their careers and hopefully learn from some of the maybe the harder lessons that you've had over your life. So the consulting business that I joined Horwath HTL, which of course is the largest leisure hospitality practice globally. And really, that was to provide a platform for me to be a growth advisor for organizations and really help them in terms of whether it's their business development, in terms of how to really add more units to the brand, or really optimize some of their commercial performance in the B2B or B2C space. So it's really that cumulative learnings that I've had over the years, and certainly the value creation that so many of my peers have provided to me. And I do a fair amount of speaking engagements, and I would tell you there's a couple of threads that I offer to everyone, Josiah. One is that it's a continuous investment in learning, and Harvard Business Review had an article. Um, I would say it was almost 10 years ago, but to me, I always framed it is that you have to choose to be a student of the game. And they talked about leadership qualities. You know, they said in the early days, and this was my experience, we were valued based on our IQ. And then, of course, EQ, your emotional intelligence, became the strength of most leaders. But this article was really talking about your CQ, your curiosity quotient, and it really being a defining characteristic of good leaders is that continuous investment in your growth mindset and being open to continuing to evolve and learn. So that was a big thing. And then my personal mantra is always this investment in relationships. And I've been a big believer that relationships truly are the currency of life. And I always provide that guidance to everyone because what I would say is that the peer mentorship that you get on your journey, your career journey, empowers your life in so many ways. And I had a boss early in my career that told me that you should spend 20% of your time in networking. And I sat back and said, how do you do that? But it really is with your volunteer work that when you support the industry and get engaged with boards and committee work, that's how you build your network. And I would tell you it has been the greatest joy of my life. And it has also powered my career in ways that I never thought possible.
There's a few things I'd love to follow up on if I could. I love the notion of curiosity quotient. And if you're a curious person, you're going to want to learn from everywhere. But I'm curious for you personally, what where have you found it most effective to learn? Is it a type of medium like a book or listening to something, or where do you learn the most?
Well, I've always been a big a reader. I believe in that Warren Buffett, statement about reading and learning in general being compound interest, and that it builds over time. I do have a son that is dyslexic, and that was a really awakening experience for me because he doesn't learn through reading. He learns mostly through visual assets, and video being most of those. So, but I just think it's really that investment. I mean, certainly with TED Talks and others, you can get the same readership experience, but I am a big reader and I invest a lot of time in newsletters and other kinds of information that comes through to me. But I also try to read at least two books a month. So I'm always looking for ways to either add sort of that emotional intelligence journey that I'm constantly working on or what's new in terms of the broader commercial world. So that's what I would offer. I also tend to do one or two formal courses a year. When I took some time to sort of reposition my career, I went back to Cornell and I did, the asset management program and several others. Of course, all things that I had done early in my career, but it was just a reinvestment in really seeing what had changed in terms of how people do some of that work. So I do believe in continuing to upgrade yourself with educational certification. I try to do a couple of those things every year as well.
I love it. And it gets me excited about, for me, learning is exciting, right? That
It's
is what
fun.
is fun
Yeah.
about life, right? Is you kind of are discovering new things, you're figuring out new ways to do things. I'm curious, you're also involved in the world of podcasting in your work with DEI advisors and, through this conversation here. Where do you see podcasts or interviews fitting in that mix? It's not the only thing, but I'm curious how you're
Oh,
thinking about it these days.
yeah, no, so I neglected to offer that. I have several podcasts that I listen to, some personally. I love Julia Louise Dreyfus in terms of the work that she's doing, only interviewing women in their 70s plus in terms of the wisdom that they have to offer. I've always been a big fan of Guy Ratz because I love listening to the entrepreneurial journey. Of course, I listened to several of your podcasts today. And the DEI advisors for me has been just an incredible journey because it's talking to so many leaders around the world and seeing the threads of their leadership journey, which there are lots of elements that are comparable, but it's also learning about how some of the adversity and challenges that they faced in their life really set them on a path and, offered them different perspectives in terms of how they approach their teams and how they approach their customers. So, of course, I listen to a lot of the DEI advisors that I do and some of my peers as well.
I'm curious how you're thinking about media in, recording this at the end of 2023. You've led marketing organizations, had teams and teams of people that are creating media messaging. Even if I think about something like podcasting, essentially this is like a radio conversation that's been
It
around
is.
for 100 plus years. So
Yeah.
the format isn't that novel. We have different ways to distribute, but the way that we interact with each other is not brand new, but we're standing sort of on the edge of this world where things that used to be expensive or time consuming to create, we as marketers, we used to spend so much time creating quote unquote content. I feel like that is going to just reach this point where it is everywhere. What becomes valuable as it relates to learning and teaching in a media environment where you have AI driven everything, it feels?
Well, I do think AI, I mean, I'm fascinated by it, Josiah, and I was a pretty early adopter in terms of trying to uh, test out different ways of working with AI, and I'm really excited about some of the new additions that Microsoft is bringing in terms of some of the visual asset integration that we can take a lot of static photography and create a lot of explainer videos and other kinds of commercial messaging in different ways. And I do think it is a real democratization of how content is going to be created, which we've been on that journey for quite some time. But I just think it's now moving to a different level in that the investments you have to make in terms of telling stories, you can continue to evolve those without the same kind of uh, budgets that used to be needed in the past. But I do think it's gotten far more complicated in terms of understanding audiences. And of course, with all the cookies and the change in attribution modeling that will occur next year, I think it's a good thing because we've been so focused on last click attribution in terms of trying to justify advertising investments. So I think that ability to understand customer journeys is going to be very impactful. And of course, what Google is now doing with Performance Max, you're throwing all of your elements, what I consider almost into a blender, and having them actually make a lot of recommendations about where you should be placing your messaging and their ability to give us some sense of how customers are engaging with all of that. It's moving at such a rapid clip, but that goes back to that statement about being invested in learning and being open to thinking about things very differently. I've always believed marketing was about surround sound in terms of understanding that your audiences are always engaging in many different places. And you have to be able to incubate and try out new things. But you also have to understand where you're going to get also the biggest impact with some of your messaging to continue brand building. Because what I think has shifted the last several years is that we've been so focused on attribution modeling and digital capabilities that we've lost some of the narrative and the storytelling capabilities. So that's where, I mean, I say the same thing that you do about radio and podcasting because, I always translate because, of course, many people podcast at events. And I just say, that's like, the satellite radio that we used to do many years ago at hotels when we did an opening. But it's what's old is new again. And I do think generally we all like to listen. I mean, I have both an Amazon and a Google Home in almost every room because I'm constantly asking them to give me something in terms of some listening, because that's also something that brings me a lot of innate joy.
This is why I'm so excited to be talking with you because you're balancing these two worlds of what is timeless and experimenting with what's at the forefront. You mentioned AI. You talk about kind of what Google's doing in terms of advanced attribution, things like that. And I find that fascinating, right? Because there's elements of how humans interact with one another that is never going to change, but at the same time, there's new capabilities coming to market. I actually wonder if we could talk a little bit about what creates a great brand in hospitality, because just today I posted a conversation I had with Adam Wallace where he's observed uh, independent lifestyle brands get acquired by larger brands and lose some of the magic there. And we were talking about a piece that Seth Godin had where if Nike made a hotel, you probably have a sense of what that would be like. But if Hyatt made a hotel, it's hard to kind of picture what that's like. And actually put that as a prompt into DALL-E, the image generator from OpenAI, and it created a not fantastic looking shoe. Somebody in the comments said, well, that you can't do that apples to apples comparison because what would a Nike hotel look like? So I put that in the prompt and put it in there. But all that to say, like, it can create these images, but I feel like that isn't really what brand building is. And during your time at BWH, you oversaw, I think it was 18 brands being developed. And so my long way of saying it, but what does it look like to create a powerful, compelling brand in the world of hospitality?
Well, I would tell you, I think everyone is challenged with that, Josiah, because there's so much commoditization in the hotel space. And I don't know that anyone truly has the answers to that, particularly when you look at conversion product being, particularly at this particular time in the development cycle, being how most brands are growing. So, we are an experience world. I think it is really bringing the experiences to the customer and trying to differentiate in some way what customer expectations can be. When I joined Best Western in 2004, it was a singular brand, and it was quite a challenge for us because we started down a path and, it had been tried a few times before to create some distinction, separation. within the Best Western family. But there's a lot of risk associated with that, and that the hoteliers in Best Western get to vote on every decision because it is a membership based business. And for us, it was really about bringing that business case forward in terms of the customer point of view. And, I remember when I did a focus group with one of our it was a B2B customer group, and they just the point they brought forward is at Best Western, they did the Forrest Gump analogy that it's like a box of chocolates. You just never knew what kind of chocolate you were going to get. I think that story of Forrest Gump and the box of chocolates is true of most of the brands in the hospitality category today. But part of it is also going back and thinking quantitatively about the business because, the average customer stays at a hotel twice a year. Most of the business is leisure in terms of certainly mid and upper mid market. So when you think about the frequency of their touch with various brands, it is very difficult to build sort of that brand narrative when you think about the frequency. I know I spoke with a few folks, one of the executives at Apple, and he was talking about with Apple Music, it's 6 or 7 times a day that the customer is engaging. Well, the lack of frequency of engagement in the hospitality space means that you're really not top of mind with customers all that often. So there's a lot of factors that impact sort of branding in the hospitality space that you have to step back and think about your audiences and then really understand what their need case is and then how you propel the business forward.
I'd
To
love
me,
to do
one of
that
the
if we could. I
yeah,
wonder if we could
yeah.
just speak a little bit to what for those that are unfamiliar with the kind of complex ecosystem of hospitality from the brands or the franchisors and the real estate owners and the management companies in that ecosystem. I guess as a brand leader, someone who oversaw the creation of 18 brands, what are some of the headwinds or things that are not immediately obvious that make it difficult maybe in that ecosystem to create a brand that maybe could is as powerful as it could be without the complexity of how the hotel industry is structured today?
Well, what I would offer is that it's very expensive to build a hotel today. That is the reality. So new construction ebb and flows in the industry, based on how difficult it is to underwrite a business and work with lenders. Now, of course, we're in a very difficult time with the lending environment that we're in. But I have a very I have an owner's mindset when I think about our business. It's mostly because of my personal growth. I started, at the unit level and moved up on my journey. But it's really understanding that they're building, in a mid market, it's probably a $25 million box. They have to have 30 to 40% equity to build that. They've got to impress a lender in terms of how they're going to be able to pay their mortgage and drive the return on that business asset. So, when you think about why hotel brands have a proliferation of product, part of it comes down to their structure, and they give areas of protection in terms of geographic ownership of a territory to a particular hotel owner with that brand. And so to drive their unit growth, they have to add more brands into their portfolio to be able to add more product in the marketplace. One of the shifts that I see, Josiah, in the marketplace today is that you think about the online travel agencies, which have been disruptors for a very long time. And of course, with Hopper and new ones coming into this space that are redefining that experience. But they are marketplaces. They have a lot of inventory on the shelf. They have a lot of price points on the shelf. They have a lot of different value propositions that they bring to the customer. Portfolio companies, which are the top 10, 12 brands in the space, they also need to be marketplaces and making sure that they have inventory on the shelf in all the right markets with all the different types of experiences that customers want. Because the customer might want an economy stay because they're only going to be in the room for 6 hours and they're going to be on the road again, or they may want a luxury experience because it's a very special occasion in their life. So having those kinds of solutions under portfolio brand with the loyalty program being the juice that connects the dots so that Josiah can earn at every step of whatever his experience quest is on that particular trip is really important. And of
I
course,
want
the
I lo-
business traveler powers so much of that because they are the frequent traveler.
Interesting. So I'd love to talk about loyalty, but just to that notion of building a brand or a portfolio of brands, it seems that some of the challenge here may be the momentum. You mentioned to continue to drive growth, you need different product types. But I'm curious for you, if you were starting a new brand from scratch no constraints today. And the objective was to provide both remarkable hospitality and generate strong financial returns from that. How would you go about doing that from scratch?
Well, I think if you're asking me that question, I think I would go down the path of creating more of a network of support for hotels to have independent product solutions with all of the core marketing assets to power their success. Josiah, because when I look at the customer today, even generationally, there's a lot of differences between the customers, but I do think that experience and unique element is something that many people are seeking in terms of whether it's a vacation, even a business trip. So, but they do need all the mechanisms of the loyalty program, the distribution capabilities in terms of being able to be powered and put on many different shelves. They need all of the solutions in terms of how to tell their story locally. And then they need the connection in terms of the sales and the loyalty programs, all the ways that you go to market to really drive some of those customers into the hotel. But that is where a lot of the hotel brands are trying to establish themselves in the soft brand category because they do understand that it's not about that cutter building, which of course is how Holiday Inn really cut their teeth in the marketplace. But there has to be some semblance of product quality, customer experience there. But again, the intermediaries have really helped us with that, with their ability to provide ratings and give customers a sense of confidence in terms of the quality of the experience that they're going to get. So I think it's leaning into all of those elements that are shaping and disrupting our business to power the hotel's success because that owner, they still only drive 65 to 67% occupancy. The holy grail is always about how to really build that performance without compromising rate. But it's really making that business successful, giving them that tools, but allowing a lot of those individual hoteliers to really bring their magic to the equation.
It's interesting you say that because soft brands aren't a new concept, but they're somewhat new. And I feel like I've heard more and more recently from people I respect across the industry talking about the benefits of that, whether it's real estate owners or brand developers. So this is a really interesting space to watch. You mentioned intermediaries, and I think sometimes people look to an Expedia or Booking.com as the holy grail of effective digital marketing. Is it even realistic for hotel brands or hotel companies to try to provide an experience like that? Or should commercial leaders think about the experience that they provide differently?
Well, I've always believed in approaching all of the partners in a way that we find opportunities to collaborate because I do think that they speak to a certain audience, and you want to make sure that if you have an owner mindset, you want to optimize the business performance for the owner. So it's about how do you drive the right performance through all of the different channels and protect rate but also drive the most volume for them. So when you think about the Expedias and Booking Holdings, of course, they're outspending the brands collectively many, many times over. So you're not going to have the same dollars on the go-to-market strategy, but you're bringing a different part of the solution to the hoteliers. And I've always believed that having a mix of sourcing strategies for the hotel is what really optimizes their business performance, but it's making sure that you don't over index with any one individual. And it's always about what's the lowest cost of acquisition to bring that customer and understanding that value of that customer because some customers have a higher value for the brand or for the individual hotelier than others. So sometimes taking them through an Expedia or Booking is the right choice for that hotel because they're not going to be a returning customer for them. So and, they represent themselves in many markets that for hotel brands, they can't effectively really be in those markets. So there's all kinds of things that each of the channel partners bring to the equation. I think it's a matter of understanding how you get the best value working with each one and making sure you're true to your owner base to make sure you're driving the right returns for them.
Interesting. You alluded earlier to the role of rewards programs. You also oversaw the dramatic expansion of rewards at Best Western. I feel like when I talk to people today about rewards or loyalty programs, I hear opinions across the board. People saying that, oh, it should just be the experience is so good that points don't matter, and I'm just going to come back regardless of that. And then people who have the other side of that. You've seen it all, and you're advising companies today on growth. I'm curious how you think about loyalty today, and what is the opportunity here?
Well, I think loyalty is an important part of the mix, but I do agree with you, Josiah, that some people don't want to play in the loyalty space. And that again is really understanding the different partners that you have to bring to the table in terms of how you really make sure you optimize to get as many customers in the door for the hotel owner. But I fundamentally believe loyalty is critically important to brands because of the nature of the first party data and the understanding of the customer insight that comes through the loyalty programs. There is a cost of sale associated with it, but you want to build recurring revenue. That's the bottom line. And so when you have an audience, when you have permission based capabilities to speak to that audience, when you have signals from that audience and be able to harvest a lot of the media intelligence in terms of really shaping your loyalty program and shaping your communication strategy with those first party permission customers that you have, it allows you to create a winning formula for the customer, a winning formula for the hotel, and also ensure that you're trying to optimize the number of stays within the portfolio brand. So to me, it's critical, but you also need, I mean, I was a big proponent of the relationship with AAA and CAA when I was with Best Western because, of course, the size, they have 65 million members. You think there's 110 million households in the United States. So they have a very strong presence. Many people would say that AAA is a legacy brand, and that is true, but they're also one of the biggest innovators in the space in terms of the way they go to market. So again, it's understanding that that's a very important part of the marketing mix. You make sure that you partner with all of these players so that you can win the most customers through them. And it's also working with the Amazons of the world and others that are bringing a different type of customer to you. So I've just been a big believer that one has to lean in and embrace all the opportunities to be on that learning journey to understand what partners can bring to the table and then understand what your core business needs are and making sure you're matching those appropriately with all of the partners that you have the opportunity to work with.
I love that. So what it's like to be leading at the top of these companies and kind of some of the headwinds that you face. I've heard that the way that BWH is structured, there was kind of a voting situation where you had to get owners approving things, which made it difficult to move quickly. Um, would you be open to talking about that? Yeah.
Best Western is a membership based organization, and owners like to be associated with that brand because they like to have their voices heard, and they have a very powerful voice because of the structure of the membership governance. And I agree with you, Josiah. It slowed us down sometimes in terms of decision making, but on the other hand, I think it adds a lot of value because there's a consultative process in decision making. So many things might take a year or two in terms of building out a roadshow and telling your story and making sure you build alignment. But I also fundamentally believed understanding those voices of the hoteliers in terms of shaping what's important to them, hearing their voice because they're first many times in terms of that customer engagement process. It really allowed us to come forward with much more richer approaches in terms of how we maybe brought this solution to life. And I would also offer that because there was so much engagement in getting to the decision, that the speed of actual activation of that decision was offset somewhat. But there's a place for everything in that space. I would say it. I think it. You had to have persuasive skills, but I also think my business case capabilities evolved considerably under there because you always had to bring forward the why for them and you had to bring forward data in terms of what the business improvement would be. But I think, the reason why I joined Best Western was because of David Kong. He was one of the most brilliant leaders that I've ever had the privilege of being associated with. But when we started down that path of the descriptor study, we won that ballot by, I don't know, 1 or 2%. But the reality was is that we had to bring the business case on what was in it for the owners. And many of them took the bet. I know because I spent hours calling members when that ballot was out there. Many of them took the bet because they trusted leaders. They said, okay, this is a really big change, and I'm not sure if this is going to be good for me. But you know what, Dorothy, because I trust you or I trust some of the other leaders in the business, I'm going to take that bet. And I would tell you that was transformational for Best Western because it put us on a path of establishing ourselves in terms of relevancy to customers in a way that mattered. And it empowered us in terms of RevPAR and lots of other contributions in a way that we had not had before. So, um, yes, there's some downsides to the culture, but I would say that there are some really powerful upsides to it. And I was always one to embrace the upsides and engage the members in a way that I hope built trust. And I was always very conscious that I had to deliver value back to them for them to continue to keep that trust or place that trust with me.
You said that relationships are currency in a sense, and I wonder if we could talk about relationship building on a few different levels. You mentioned in working with owners in your role as CMO, they trusted you. What have you found effective in building trust with key stakeholders like ownership?
Well, there's a couple things I would offer back. Josiah, I've always believed in that framework of, if you're going to go looking for a friend, that's a very hard thing to do. But if you're going to become a friend for someone, there are many that want to join with you. So to me, it was always trying to understand and become knowledgeable in terms of the individuals that I was working with and understand their family and their history. I'll tell you, as an introvert, relationships are much harder for me. It's a skill set I had to work on. But I also early in my career, I worked for an ownership group, and one of the owners there told me the story of the breakfast plate, which I'm sure many of your listeners have heard before, but it was the bacon and the egg on the plate. And he said, Dorothy, he said, owners are the bacon. He said, we're the pigs. We're the committed ones. We're the ones that have put our money on the line and our livelihood on the line. He said, you're kind of a marketer and a supporter and someone that helps us. So you're the chicken. You brought the egg. You're involved in the solution. But I've never lost sight of that the owners have made a huge financial commitment. And so my job was always to support them and help them drive growth. And I never lost sight of that. That was my role in the equation. And I had to make sure that I brought that value forward. So to me, it's that mindset, Josiah. It's understanding what's in it for the other person. It's understanding of trying to be a friend rather than asking someone for friendship. So it's investing in the relationship, trying to understand them personally and professionally, and then trying to find those ways of collaborating and making sure you're driving that value. So that's what I would say. I have been very blessed in my life because I've had many opportunities to develop really wonderful relations, and HSMAI has been critically important to me, the Hospitality Sales and Marketing Association, because that was a level playing field where I got to partner with many of my colleagues who had similar roles with other organizations. But there were many shared things that we were working to power the industry forward. And they were always there for me to help me. They often, were people that I called when we were trying to figure out different solutions, not the least during the COVID period. But you also develop a friendship with these folks because you become vested in them personally. So that's a story that I would offer back on relationships.
HSMA is a great organization, and I'm just fascinated by this notion of learning with others that are in the arena doing the thing, and you 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 just have a level of caring, resonating with, building relationships with people that are out there doing and building, and so that's really cool to hear. You mentioned you also took your role at Best Western because of David Kong. I'm curious if you could speak a little bit to how you thought about relationships in career decision making, whether it's the roles you decided to take or consulting others. How has that played out as you've built your career?
Well, the advice that I give to everyone, Josiah, is you got to hire your boss. And David used to always chuckle because he thought he hired me. And I said, no, David, I hired you. And I do think that understanding of personal fit and culture, and if you're going to have someone who's going to be a strong mentor and ally to your career. And David was really important to me because, I'm an older woman who most of my career I was the only woman in the room. David obviously represented an underrepresented group, and I knew that he had many shared experiences similar to mine. But he also was a brilliant strategist. He's a very humble individual, and we had a very common approach in terms of really driving the business through strategy and owner value creation. So I knew he'd be a good fit, but that whole element of understanding hiring your boss, making sure the organization that you're joining, that you're going to be a strong cultural fit, and that there's going to be joy in the work that you do because we spend far more of our time than we ever anticipate, Josiah, in our day to day. And it's also, it's not just the time, it's the intellectual investment that you have to make. I know as a consultant today, there are days that I am really exhausted by the end of the day because you're given really hard problems to solve when you're a consultant. That's why people bring you in to ask for advice. But the reality is that that's your role in the what you're being asked to do. So you have to understand that, ensure that you bring it, because that's why people have hired you.
What do you do to recharge? Because in that advisory work, it is intellectually, imagine emotionally at times, very draining. This is true in any leadership role, so it's not unique to advisory work. But I'm curious, like, what you found useful for yourself in sort of recharging that battery, so to speak.
Well, for me at this stage of my life, I think I referenced Chip Conley's wisdom at work, but I'm really in a very different phase of my life, Josiah. So, working with others and helping them achieve their career dreams is something that inspires me and it gives me a lot of joy. So, the day to day engagement of working with leaders in different stages of their development truly recharges me. There's days where you're tired, but when you get someone that you've made a difference in their life, I will tell you your whole mindset shifts. And so I think that element of being purposeful and giving back and seeing others in terms of advancing their career or advancing something that's important to them, that's truly how I get a lot of joy and engagement back for what I need. On the personal level, I mean, for me, I said I love reading and I love reading business books. That's part of my curiosity quotient, I guess. But I also am a big pet owner and I love all those times with my pets and walking and the time that I have with my remarkable husband and my son. And that's the other advice I tell people is choose your partner wisely because while you hire your boss and that's going to define your career, the partner you choose for your life they're going to define your life. And I just celebrated 40 years with my husband, and
Congrats.
for me, my husband has given me more than anyone in terms of allowing me to achieve the kinds of career dreams that I aspired to very early in my life.
That's really cool. And congratulations.
Thank
Um,
you.
I guess, as we are closing out one year, we're looking to the year ahead. I'm curious, what are you most excited about in the world of hospitality or beyond moving forward? What are you curious about or excited by these days?
Well, what I'm really excited about, Josiah, is just the level of disruption that I think is ahead of us. AI, of course, is propelling a lot of that, but there's an awful lot of disruptors in the tech space, and there's an awful lot of disruptors in the marketing space. So I do think that the next few years, there's going to be so much change in terms of our go to market strategies, the way we're going to drive customer engagement, the way we're going to drive hotelier success. So I'm in that high curiosity quotient in terms of investing in my own personal learning and also in my professional learning in terms of how I can help others. But we are on the stage of a major seismic change. And I love being part of that early stage of what that might look like. I mean, the big thing for me has always been about that relationship investment and then, from a commercial perspective, I do believe people need to understand the commercial goals of anyone and what success looks like. And I do fundamentally believe, in terms of your success quotient, if you can be aligned with what success looks like for whoever you're working for, then you can at least achieve those kinds of metrics. If it's undefined, you'll never get there. So I do think having a very structured approach and disciplined approach to a business plan is important for everyone.
Hmm. That's so good. Where would you invite the people watching this, the people listening to this, to learn more about you and your work, or any other places you would point them?
Well, I try to be fairly active on LinkedIn, so I would welcome anyone that would like to link in with me. It would be an honor for me to engage. And then DEI Advisors is, again, it has an incredible repository of brilliant leaders. And what I would encourage people, if you're trying to do a sales pitch against some companies, investing some time in the relationship equity and learning a little bit about the person that you may be pitching to, or understanding their company needs and wants, because a lot of them will articulate that, but also just some of the wisdom and how they have powered their careers. I think there's a lot of really rich content there for individuals to learn from.
Well, thank you for joining us today. I've learned so much from you over the years and stuff you've
Thank you,
shared. For me, it
Josiah.
was a real honor to speak with you today. I've learned a lot from you in this conversation. I know many others will as well. So thank you for taking the time. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Josiah. It was an honor. Thank you.